Hello, hello, and welcome. Welcome once again to the Secrets of the High Demand Coach podcast. And I am here with yet another high demand coach. It is the one and only Jahmad Canley. Jahmad is dedicated to empowerment and education for all people, getting his start in organization development over 18 years ago. Jahmad has assisted numerous organizations across multiple industries in creating better, more effective cultures. He is internationally known as a top-level culture transformation consultant, peak performance coach, author, and masterful storyteller. His passion for helping others unleash their potential has allowed him to work in top organizations such as Microsoft, Amazon, Western Union, LA Philharmonic Symphony, USA Swimming, and many more. And he's here with us today. Jahmad, so excited to have you here. I'd love to dive in. One of the areas that as I was researching the episodes, just a real area of expertise for you is not just culture in a kind of a soft sense of the word, but how you develop the leaders that will develop your culture. And so I want our first question kind of out of the gate here is, we've got founders, leaders, executives listening to this. What would you say is probably the most likely way that they need to think differently about developing the leaders within their organization?
I love that question because I think that's where you get the biggest return on your investment when you're talking about culture, is developing your people, but starting with developing your leaders. Excuse me. One of the reasons why I say that, Scott, is because in our research, what our research tells us is that people experience the culture through their direct supervisor.
Yes.
Right. So you can have an organization with all types of great culture, but it doesn't always work its way through the organization because people experience the culture through the direct supervisor. And we probably have all experienced that, where you have a what I like to call a dynamic, magical CEO, right? Who is all about culture, but my supervisor is a little bit of a jerk. And even though we have these wonderful values of how we treat people and everything else, my supervisor doesn't lead that way. Well, that's how I'm experiencing culture. So if we're not investing the time into our leaders, who then are investing the time in their leaders, and it just trickles down, by the time that you get to the people who are often working the front lines or doing, some of the most important work inside of an organization, they're not experiencing the culture. I should say it this way. They're often not experiencing the culture the way that the founders or the top level executives dreamed of, imagined, and envisioned.
Wow. And how would you say folks who've gotten a hold of that, who understand, your culture is not the words on the wall, right? It's the experience of the individuals in your company. What are some of the primary differences between organizations who get that and those who are still on the journey of discovering it?
Yeah, so the outcomes are so different, right? Right now, one of the things that I think most organizations that I work with are really looking for, I hear this all the time, is innovation.
Yeah.
Well, innovation is not something that you just go and buy and pick up at the grocery store. It's cultivated through culture, right? And the way that you get that, again, is exactly what you're talking about. So organizations who have built cultures that are really inclusive and dynamic and really bring about, supporting people and ideas, they often will get the innovation. Yeah. Because people feel safe in that organization to bring ideas. People feel accountable and people feel empowered to bring ideas. I've seen other organizations that have success. So please hear me out, because you can definitely be a successful organization and not have that culture. But when you're put side by side with the organization who is really focused on culture, developing leaders, the two will never match it. You can still have a level of success, and you often will, but when you come head to head, every single time, culture is going to, right? The organization who has the strongest culture is often going to win that race.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest differences. You don't get those things, innovation. You don't get high retention. You don't get people, the internal loyalty to a brand, without intentionally focusing on that as a part of your culture.
Yeah. A few of our more astute students of the model we work with in predictable success will recognize the truth in that right away, because there are two things, three, that are really, really important around culture. One is the ability to innovate at scale, right? For a lot of our folks, especially the more entrepreneurial organizations, it's not so much that they are not innovative because they have that super innovative CEO, right, or a couple people on their executive team, but it's that they haven't built an innovative culture.
That's right.
Right. And so important. The other one is key transitions. And I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, because we've been through so much change over the last few years. How is it that that a strong leadership core really can carry a culture through the amount of change that we're experiencing right now in the workplace?
Yeah. I think one is creating that culture of trust, right? In uncertain times, people will look to leadership. And even if they're unsure of what the future holds, if I trust leadership, and I trust that our leadership has our best interests at heart, and that I trust that our leadership has what it takes to navigate us through this,
Yeah.
I'm going to stay, right? I'm going to have more confidence in that. What happens so often in some organizations is that we wait for the crisis to appear, and then we try to, all of a sudden, we want people to trust us. But we haven't cultivated that culture all the way along. So I think that that's one of the things, that can really help people, like you said, in all the transition that we're seeing is trust. One of the other things I would say that comes along with trust is that culture of open dialogue. Some older leadership models don't believe in open dialogue. It's one-way communication, and to even ask questions or to have those types of conversations would be seen as insubordinate, right? Leadership is one directional, and all those different things. But open dialogue, I think, helps in those times of uncertainty, times of transition. You want someone to say, I'm nervous or I'm unsure. A big thing that's going on right now, Scott, I know that you've heard of it and others have as well, is the quiet quitting. Well, that's a cultural thing, because when you have developed strong relationships and that open dialogue, you don't have people silent quitting.
Right.
If people are thinking about, leaving the organization, if people are feeling like they're not engaged, if people are feeling like the work's not challenging, those conversations are being had, and then you can find ways to solve for it. When you haven't developed that type of culture, that's when you get people just disengaging, collecting the paycheck, but spending their time, doing other things. And so, again, I think that building trust and building that culture of open relationship, open conversation, open dialogue. And one of the things that I share with leaders all the time is it's not the expectation that you're going to have all the answers. Open dialogue is about saying, here's what I know, here's what I don't know, here's what I hope to know.
Right.
And that builds trust, right? Yeah. So I think that those are key during those times of uncertainty. Those are keys during times of transition, that if you built that culture of trust and open conversation, you're going to get a lot more people staying in, right? Versus jumping ship at the first sign of the waves.
Yeah, that's so true. So there's some folks listening to this, and I can just hear it, right? Because I've heard it 1,000 times, but they're in, right? It's like, he got us, we've got to do this. How in the world are we going to do this? We have our real jobs to do. How we've already got all this stuff that we have to get done. How can we possibly spend more time? What's it going to take?
Yeah, it takes intentionality. So here's a great example, I think, on this. I say I think because it's my examples. Right. And what I mean by that, Scott, is we do an exercise, and some people have heard of these different quotes. There's several of them out there about, culture beats strategy, or culture eats strategy for breakfast, and all those different things. And people have often asked me, Jahmad, what does that mean? And why would you say that, especially considering that you do strategic planning? And what I explain to people is that in your strategic plan, you should be planning for culture. What type of culture do you want to create?
Yeah.
And it's not one more thing. I share this with organizations all the time, and we have the results. We have the proof that when you spend time intentionally focusing on culture, it makes everything else easier.
Yeah.
When I speak with leaders, especially mid-level leaders and managers, one of the biggest complaints that they have is that they actually don't have the time to lead because they spend so much time putting out fires.
Right.
But when you put culture in place, right? When the culture is in place, those things start to take care of themselves, and it offers more time to actually get to the leading. So when I hear leaders say, like, how are we going to do this with all the other things that we have to do? I tell them, this is the investment. This is what leadership is. Leadership is about creating and setting culture. If there's nothing else that you do as a leader, it's about creating culture, right? Yes, you need to create vision and everything else. Culture needs to be right up there in the top three things that you're doing as a leader, and then helping develop other leaders so that they know how to develop culture as well, right? Because once you get culture in place, it takes care of itself. So I'll just leave with this. Well, one question I ask every leader to think about when they get up in the morning, before they start their day, before they answer a phone call, respond to an email, log into a Zoom meeting, before they walk in the building, is to simply ask themselves this one question, and that is, what type of culture do I want to create today? It changes everything, Scott. It changes the way that I respond to the email. It changes the way that I walk through the hallway. Yes, I might have 30 emails on my phone that I'm trying to respond to, but if I ask myself, what type of culture do I create today? As I walk past you in the hallway, I stop and I smile and I say, good morning, Scott.
Yeah.
Right. And then I may get right back to my emails. I stop and I speak to the person at the front desk. If I'm not consciously thinking about culture, it's not that I don't care about those people, but it's just I'm thinking about all the other things that I have to do. But if I just ask myself, what type of culture do I want to create today? It changes the way that I start the Zoom meeting. It changes the way that I kick off the staff session. It changes all those things, right? So when people say, how do I do it when I have all these other things to do? I tell them, give it 90 days of intentional focus on culture, and I promise you, you will see the return on your time.
Yeah.
You'll see the return.
It's so very powerful, because one of the challenges of a lot of the work we do around culture is that it tends to be very abstract, right? We have a culture of innovation or integrity or, something else that starts with an I. And we put it out in like these 30-year plan kind of environment. It's like way distant, way far away. And we don't really ever take the time to map that to how do we actually need to behave today as leaders, as employees, as customer service reps. So I love that question because it's so simple, but it's so powerful. And it's just a brilliant little piece of advice. I'm trying to, I could go so many places on that. Let's keep going here. So I want to shift gears just slightly. And I want to look ahead a little bit further. And as you've been helping companies develop leadership, especially in the environments that you have, what would you say are some of the most critical skills that leaders are going to need to have to succeed over the next 10 to 20 years?
Critical skills for leaders to have over the next 10 to 20 years. One that I think is going to be extremely important is being able to lead across generations. That is probably the biggest challenge that I'm seeing most leaders have, is that we have more generations in the workplace at the same time than we ever had before. And though there's similarities, there's also some great differences as well. And how do you lead that way, right? And how do you lead across those generational differences, understanding that communication styles are different? I think one of the other things that leaders are going to need to really think about is, what does the world look like post-COVID? And what I mean by that is the expectations of organizations have changed. People still want all of the hard tangibles, meaning that they want the organization to pay them and all those things. Remote work is something that organizations and leaders are going to need to think about. And here's what I mean about, I'm not talking about, again, the task of, do we do remote work or do we not? What I'm talking about as far as the leaders are concerned is, remote work is going to be a part of the future.
Yeah.
The question becomes, how do I create culture when half of my team is hybrid and the other team is in office? How do I keep the lines of communication? How do I build that teamwork and that feeling of belonging when I have people who may never actually physically come together? That's a new challenge that we haven't had before, because so much of relationship building historically has always happened in person.
Yeah.
It happens after, if you and I were together doing this podcast, immediately after this podcast, we would spend 10 to 15 minutes after this podcast just kind of having some small talk, talking about, what do you have coming up over the next 2 weeks and those types of things. And that's where relationships are often built.
Right.
Well, and so that's how leaders have cultivated relationships. I drop by your cubicle, your office, and I hey, that's a cute picture of a puppy, and we talk about, dogs or whatever it is. Well, those things don't happen that way in a virtual environment unless we're
Right.
intentional.
Yeah.
And so again, I don't think the question is about whether or not it's going to be remote or hybrid. I think that question has been answered for us, whatever that look like in each organization. The question is, as a leader, how do I create culture around that, right? How do I create culture around having someone who is 65 or 66 in the workplace as someone who is 20 years old in the workplace, who are coming from very different perspectives on how they view work ethic, how they view communication, how they're dealing with artificial intelligence, right? And how do I create that sense of respect for the differences and the perspectives? I think that's a leadership challenge that people are going to need to think about as well moving forward. And then lastly, the last thing I would say too about leadership moving forward in the next 10 years, I think it's going to be, how do we continue to lead in a way that not only allows our organizations to be successful, but also helps people focus on taking care of themselves. And the reason why I say that is I think that as leaders, it's part of our responsibility. And I don't think it has been so much in the past, right? It's like, I just need to worry about what happens in the 8 to 5 and make sure the jobs get done. But again, if we look at the research and we look at the data, we recognize that when people are whole, when they're healthy, they bring a better self to work every day. And one of the things that the pandemic really highlighted for us was that people weren't healthy, right? In different aspects of our lives. And so I think that it's a leader's responsibility to kind of help shape that in the culture and to lead by example. And that's not always easy. It's not easy for me. I was raised in hard work, right? And you work. And so finding those moments to breathe and balance and do all of those different things, it didn't come naturally for me. It's a skill that I needed to develop, but I understood eventually how important it was, but also how do I help other people build that into their life? And once we started doing that as an organization, personally for our organization, the return has been, again, people just bring a better self to work when they are more well-rounded, when they're balanced in other aspects of their life. They bring a better self to work. The creativity is different. The engagement is different. So I think that's a leadership challenge going forward, is how do we help people do that? How do we build that into our culture?
So good. So good. So I've got another question. I ask all my guests this question. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are on it. So what would you say is the biggest secret that you wish wasn't a secret at all? What's that one thing you wish everybody watching or listening today knew?
It would be that as leaders, specifically speaking to leaders, that there are high expectations and that you don't have to know it all. It's probably, simple and just makes sense, but I work with so many leaders and so many organizations who still carry that pressure that a good leader is supposed to have all the answers. And what I find, so often is that the best and most effective leaders know that they don't have all the answers. They're transparent about not having all the answers, and they surround themselves with like well-rounded teams because they recognize that the best answers come collectively. But I would say, Scott, that is a rare trait that I see. And so leaders are under a lot of, I guess I would say, unnecessary pressure sometimes that we put ourselves under because of this expectation or this feeling that we have to know it all and we have to figure it all out on our own, or that we have to be perceived a certain way as being all-knowing. And so I would say I think that that's a secret that I wish more people knew, is that I don't even know that the expectation is there. Of course, it's there by some people because there's also this idea that, well, you make the big bucks, so you should know it all, right? But I think the earlier that you can establish that that's not your leadership style and that's not how you lead, and, the earlier that you can bring people in, just the more success that as leaders that we're going to have.
So true. Jahmad, there's some folks listening to this and they're just resonating with every word you've said. They've got to have more. They've finally realized that piece that's missing. How can they find more out about you and the work that you do?
Yeah, they can definitely reach out to the website. Our website is www.potential-unleash.com. I'm on social media. My book, Ideal, which I think, is great for everyone, not just leaders. It's a really short read because the way that I write is for application. I think awareness is great. Application is better. So the book is 100 pages long, but it moves people to not just concept, but being able to apply it. So I those are ways, and that they can find that book on Amazon. They can find it on our website. And of course, on the website, you can also find our contact information, my contact information, and reach out, any way that I can help and support. That's what I'm here for.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Thank you again for this episode as well, for being on, sharing with us today. Powerful, powerful insights that I know are going to move some leaders and their cultures forward. So thanks again for being on the show. For everyone watching and listening today, your time and attention mean the world to us. I hope you got as much out of this conversation as I know I did, and I cannot wait to see you next time. Take care.